downed pilot rescued, 48 hours in the ZAGROS. How a hunted colonel, the most dangerous paramedics alive, and one audacious CIA lie pulled off the rescue of a generation. Day 37 of Operation Epic Furry, the 5th of April, 2026, Easter Sunday. The sun came up this morning the same way it always does. Birds, coffee, the smell of something baking somewhere. For most of America, it was a quiet, ordinary morning, kids hunting eggs, families crowding into church pews, someone's grandmother burning the rolls again, and somewhere in the ZAGROS mountains of southwestern Iran, a United States Air Force colonel was wedged into a crack in a mountainside at altitude, injured, hunted, and running on nothing but cold air, pain, and 2 decades of training that nobody outside the military fully understands. He had been there for 2 days, not 2 hours, not overnight. 2 complete rotations of the Earth since his F-15 E-Strike Eagle went down and he was still out there. The terrain around him, knife-edged ridges, crumbling rock faces, ravines that swallow sound and shadow in equal measure, was the kind of landscape that looks dramatic on satellite imagery and feels genuinely hostile when you are the one trying to survive in it. High altitude means your body works harder for less oxygen. The early April temperature in the Iranian highlands at night is the kind of cold that removes the word comfortable from your vocabulary within about 20 minutes. He could not move fast. The landing had broken something in his lower leg, and his body was not letting him forget it. He stayed anyway. He hid anyway. He made it anyway. This is that story. April 3rd, the day everything changed. The 48th Fighter Wing flies out of RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom, one of the most combat-seasoned F-15E units in the Air Force. On the morning of the 3rd of April, 2026, one of their aircraft went down over the ZAGROS mountains after taking Iranian fire. Both crew members ejected. Here is something worth understanding about high-altitude ejections over hostile terrain that the movies consistently get wrong. The moment that seat fires and you leave the aircraft, you are not in control of where you land. Wind currents at altitude redirect parachutes over distances that can separate 2 people by a mile or more before they ever touch the ground. The parachute itself enormous, visible from altitude broadcasts your approximate position to everyone in the region the instant it opens. Your first priority when your feet hit the earth is therefore not to assess your injuries, not to take in your surroundings, not to catch your breath. It is to put distance between yourself and where you landed immediately, because that location is already known to people you do not want to meet. The pilot landed, made contact, was located and extracted by rescue forces the following day. That operation cost the rescue crews real punishment. The helicopters involved took battle damage, crew members were wounded, and they still completed the mission and came home. They absorbed those hits and then turned around and started planning for crew member number 2. The WSO, the weapons systems officer, the colonel in the back seat came down separately. Different terrain, different shadow, different set of problems. Nobody said anything publicly about the pilot's rescue at the time either. That was deliberate. Announcing the first extraction while the colonel was still on the mountain would have handed the IRGC confirmation of exactly what they were dealing with and given them more reason to close the search. The decision to stay quiet was the right one. It kept the colonel alive long enough for what came next. Also around this time, an A-10 Warthog was lost near the Strait of Hormuz. That pilot was recovered from the water by naval assets. It barely registered in the news cycle. An American pilot rescued from the Persian Gulf during an active combat operation, and it was practically a footnote. That tells you something about the scale of what Operation Epic Furry actually is. What 2 days alone in Iran actually feels like. I want you to sit with something for a moment. I have been a combat medic. I have been a paramedic. I have worked in high-stress environments where the human body is failing and the clock is running, and the decisions you make in the next 90 seconds determine whether someone goes home or doesn't. I know what it does to a person's physiology and psychology to operate under sustained threat and sustained pain simultaneously. What this colonel did over those 48 hours is beyond what most people's imaginations will accurately render. So let me try to make it real. It is night in the Iranian highlands. The temperatures drop to the point where staying still, which you must do for hours at a time, becomes its own physical threat. You are in a rocky outcropping high enough above the valley floor that the air is thin. And thin air means your body's already working harder than usual just to keep itself regulated. Your injured leg is not a background discomfort. It is a constant, intrusive presence demanding your attention in the middle of everything else, demanding your attention. Below you, you can hear the search, not distant, not abstract. You can hear organized movement in the valley, vehicles, voices, the particular rhythm of people who are coordinating, not wandering. The IRGC has committed significant resources to finding this American. Local militias have been activated. Civilian informants have been recruited with cash incentives that represent more money than most of those families will see in a year. Aerial surveillance is sweeping the terrain. Dogs are working the lower ridges. And you cannot run. You cannot use your radio for more than seconds at a time because sustained transmissions are a direction-finding invitation. So you send the minimum brief, encrypted, broken transmissions that carry just enough information to confirm you are alive and where you roughly are, then silence, then wait. Then move only when you are certain the immediate threat has shifted. When the search noise gets close enough that you can hear the texture of individual voices rather than just the general sound of people, you stop everything. You do not shift your weight. You do not adjust your position. You breathe in shallow, controlled cycles that a meditation instructor would be proud of, and that you are achieving entirely through willpower and the memory of a SEER instructor screaming at you to hold it together. Your ankle communicates its displeasure at your choice to remain motionless. You remain motionless anyway. When the noise pulls back, when the search pattern moves to a different sector, when the voices fade into the distance, you move, not down, up, into harder terrain, into rock faces that do not hold tracks, into positions where the angle of the ridge breaks any line of sight from below. You make the search as geometrically difficult as possible for the people doing it. Nearly 2 days of that cycle. Move, freeze, wait, reassess, move again. He was running on training, stubbornness, and the bone-level certainty that somewhere out of sight, someone was working to find him. He was right. The school that made this possible. Most people have never heard of SARA training in any detail. That is probably fine for most people. For anyone trying to understand how an injured man stayed hidden and functional in hostile terrain for 48 hours, it is the central fact of the story. SEER survival, evasion, resistance, escape came out of a hard institutional reckoning. Korea and Vietnam produced American prisoners of war who faced captors uninterested in the Geneva Convention. And the outcomes varied in ways that haunted the military for decades. The men who endured the worst and held together longest were not necessarily the ones with the most physical strength or the most bravado. They were the ones who had internalized specific trainable mental frameworks. The US military looked at those outcomes carefully and drew the correct conclusion. Resilience under that kind of pressure is something that can be taught. So they built a school to teach it. The course runs roughly 3 weeks. The first portion is academic, not textbook and lecture academic, but the kind where you are studying the interrogation techniques that have historically broken American service members so that you recognize them when they are being used on you. The psychology of captivity, how to construct a plausible story under sustained questioning. Why the interrogator who offers you food and sympathy is historically more dangerous than the one who makes threats, because our brains are wired to respond to kindness with openness in ways that sustained stress alone does not produce. The second portion goes outdoors. Land navigation without the technology we have come to depend on. Shelter construction without materials worth mentioning. Food procurement from whatever the environment offers, which in training has included things ranging from rabbits to snakes to the contents of rural gardens when desperation and opportunity coincide. Water sourcing in terrain that is not obligated to provide it. The practical, granular business of staying alive in wilderness with very little. The third portion is captivity simulation, and it is the one that people remember. You are hunted, you are caught, a hood goes over your head, you go somewhere on a vehicle. At the end of that ride is a simulated prison environment staffed by instructors who operate under specific medical supervision and safety protocols, and who, within those parameters, are going to make you genuinely miserable in ways designed to replicate what actual captivity produces. Sleep deprivation, confinement, psychological pressure through noise and disorientation. Interrogations that cycle between soft approaches and hard ones, specifically because the soft approach, the patient empathetic one, is harder to withstand than the aggressive one, and you need to discover that before it is real. Physical contact is permitted within documented limits. A psychologist is on duty. The safe word exists. But within those guardrails, the instructors are there to find your limits, not protect you from them. Because the point is simple. Discover your breaking point in a controlled environment, not on a mountain in Iran. The colonel had already found it and left it behind long before April 3rd. So when the IRGC closed in and the bounties went out and the temperature dropped and the ankle made its opinions known, what took over was not panic. What took over was every investment the United States military had made in that man before he ever climbed into that cockpit. It held what the CIA did while he was hiding. Here is where this story moves from impressive to genuinely extraordinary. While the colonel was maintaining his position in the highlands, the Central Intelligence Agency was running an active deception operation inside Iran. CIA operatives spread deliberate misinformation through multiple channels word that the American had already been located, already been moved, already been extracted through a maritime route on the other side of the country. None of it was true. All of it was intended to create uncertainty inside the IRGC about whether the search was still productive, buying time and reducing search pressure on the colonel's actual position. While Iranian forces were parsing conflicting information, U.S. intelligence capabilities working in coordination with Israeli intelligence, which had stood down its own regional operations specifically to support this effort, were working to pinpoint the colonel's location precisely. There had been legitimate concern that the emergency signal could be deliberate bait, an adversary tactic with documented historical use. The confirmation that it was genuine and not a trap came from that parallel intelligence effort. The moment that confirmation was established, it went up the chain immediately. CIA Director Ratcliffe to Secretary of War Hegseth to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the President. The rescue mission was authorized and aircraft were moving within hours. Ground forces were inside Iranian territory before the day was out. The Israelis, for their part, are owed acknowledgement here. They shared what they knew. They stepped back from their own operations to give this mission room. Prime Minister Netanyahu's Easter Sunday statement about free societies and the forces of darkness was not rhetorical. Israel had skin in this outcome and they contributed to it. The people who went in. I need to talk about who these people are. Because I promise you the political coverage tomorrow will not. Air Force pararescuemen PJs are the most decorated enlisted specialty in the US Air Force. That is not a talking point. It is a count. 1 Medal of Honor, 12 Air Force crosses, over 100 Silver Stars. These are the awards given for actions so far beyond normal expectation that the military felt obligated to formally acknowledge them. From a single specialty, that number represents an astonishing concentration of documented heroism. Their motto is straightforward. These things we do that others may live. It is not marketing. It is a statement of purpose that these men are evaluated against in real time, in real conditions, at real cost. Becoming a PJ takes approximately 2 years, and the pipeline discards roughly 4 out of every 5 candidates who enter it. The ones who complete it come out as registered paramedics with full special operations combat capability. The medical training is comprehensive emergency surgical techniques, advanced airway management, medication administration, trauma protocols that go considerably beyond what civilian emergency medicine requires. The tactical training is equally thorough. A PJ in the field can fight through an armed threat, treat the resulting casualties, and coordinate the extraction, sometimes simultaneously, always under conditions that would compromise lesser training. The thing that sets PJs apart from most other special operations specialists is not just what they can do, it is what they are for. Their entire reason for existing is not to destroy objectives, it is to bring people home. The willingness to go toward the most dangerous place in the operational environment, not to hold ground or take ground, but to find one person and get them out, requires a particular kind of orientation that is genuinely unusual, even among people who have chosen careers built around risk. They volunteered for that. knowing exactly what it meant. On the night of April 4th, going in alongside the PJs, Naval Special Warfare Development Group operators, Delta Force, Green Berets, Army Rangers, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, whose reputation in the special operations community is built on decades of night missions in conditions where the margin for error is a number that starts with 0. They flew the insertion and fire support aircraft. They flew the combat rescue helicopters. They flew in darkness, at low altitude, over terrain that would give most pilots a genuine appreciation for the word hazardous. Above all of this, a 10C Thunderbolts on close air support aircraft designed specifically to absorb punishment and deliver concentrated firepower at low altitude in proximity to friendly forces. Reaper drones holding continuous watch and executing strikes on Iranian personnel who came too close to the rescue zone. Fighter coverage for air superiority. Electronic warfare platforms degrading Iranian radar and command networks in real time. Tanker aircraft keeping the package fueled and on station. Transport aircraft capable of operating from improvised surfaces far from any established airfield. They also established a temporary forward base inside Iranian territory, a fuel and weapons resupply point constructed specifically for this mission inside the country they were operating against, so the aircraft could sustain the operation as long as it took. Let that sit for a moment. A logistics node built overnight in Iran. Hundreds of American service members, dozens of aircraft, infrastructure constructed in enemy territory, every piece of it aimed at bringing one colonel home. This is what America looks like when she decides not to leave someone behind. The firefight and the burning planes. The rescue force inserted under darkness, pushing deep into territory that bristled with Iranian military infrastructure, missile systems, air defense networks, assets the regime considers non-negotiable. Night Stalker aircraft delivered the ground teams to the colonel's position. Surveillance assets and strike platforms held the airspace above. They found him. He was conscious, he was injured, he was coherent. The PJs went to work on site, managing the injuries with the same clinical focus they carry into every extraction, the kind of detached professional competence that I recognize from my own time as a medic, where your training takes the wheel and your emotional response gets filed for later. They stabilized him on the ground. They started moving. The IRGC chose that moment to arrive. Iranian forces converged on the extraction point, and what followed was close, violent, and decided by the quality of the people holding the perimeter. The operators put withering fire on the approaching threat. Close air support rolled in from overhead in ways that are, at close range, genuinely hard to describe to someone who has not witnessed them. The rescue force held. They did not give back an inch of ground around the colonel, and they held it until everyone who needed to be on an aircraft was on their way to an aircraft. The airstrip brought its own crisis. The MC-130J transports, built for austere operations, built for exactly this scenario, landed to load the force. 2 of them immediately became inoperable, their landing gear buried in terrain that looked solid and was not. With Iranian forces in contact, and the situation still active, there was no version of this where those aircraft were recovered conventionally. The demolition teams went to work. Both planes destroyed, burning. The airspace above the improvised strip lit up with what those aircraft had become. Replacement aircraft arrived. Everyone, the operators, the PJs, and the colonel was loaded and airborne. They departed Iranian airspace with every American they had arrived with and left behind only wreckage that told the story of what it costs America to refuse to leave someone behind. The colonel was treated in Kuwait, injured, stable, on his way to a full recovery. Not one American life lost, not one. Who doesn't make the news? Think about the colonel's family this morning. Because somewhere today there is a spouse who spent 48 hours doing the math on a situation they were not allowed to know the details of, maintaining composure for the children while running the worst possible scenarios on a private loop. Military spouses develop a specific and terrible competence for this, the ability to hold the face together while the interior is doing something else entirely. The practice calm that deploys over years until it becomes second nature, and the way it fails in the small moments when nobody is watching. The way a phone vibrating on a table becomes a physical event when the news might be inside it. That phone rang this morning with the right words on the other end. I also want to name something about the people who went in and will not make the news cycle. Somewhere tonight, there are men in a debrief room, operators and PJs and air crew, who will give an account of what happened. File it away in classified reports that the public will never read and go back to quarters. Their families cannot ask where they were. The deal they made when they volunteered for those pipelines does not include public recognition as a standard feature. They knew that when they raised their hand, they would raise it again tomorrow. What happened in the Zagros Mountains last night was not a surprise. It was an outcome. The result of years of deliberate, expensive, demanding preparation, SEER courses that find breaking points before they matter, PJ pipelines that build the rarest combination of medical and combat capability in a single person, Night Stalker, flight hours, logged in darkness, over terrain nobody should be flying through, CIA field relationships built over years in places that matter when one colonel is in a rock face and needs to be found. Every dollar of it was there last night. Every hour. Operation Epic Furry is still active. The strait is not yet open. There are men and women downrange right now. This is not finished. But today on Easter Sunday, which I do not think is accidental, a colonel who trusted his training and held on long enough came home, and the people who went to get him did something the history books will record long after the political argument about this conflict is forgotten. Find a way to say thank you anyway. What part of this rescue are you paying attention to that you think is getting missed in the coverage? Reply, because I know most people have never heard of a combat rescue officer, do not know what that pipeline actually costs in human terms, and have no framework for understanding what a FARP built overnight inside Iran says about American military capability. That conversation is worth having. But what do I know? I am only a medically retired Army combat medic, a former paramedic, and a science teacher who has spent an entire career in the specific study of what it takes to keep a human being alive when the surrounding environment has other plans.